Welcome again to the Watershed Academy. The first presentation in Module 5 in the Likely Partners series is going to be on some of the fundamentals of developing partnerships. Today, we'll cover three major questions related to partnerships. First, why should you make partnerships? Secondly, how do you get your stakeholders involved? And thirdly, how can you recruit and then maintain volunteer involvement? All these questions address the first step in this for effective watershed management. And much of the content from today's presentation was taken from the US EPA's Handbook for Developing Watershed Plans to Restore and Protect Our Waters, which is available online if you'd like to look into it for further details. Who are these partners? What's between stakeholders and partners? A stakeholder is anyone who can affect or help with the implementation of watershed protection or improvement actions. This can include decision makers, residents or businesses in the area, individuals or organizations that can create roadblocks or help ease the path to success, or local historians or others who just have helpful information to contribute. A partner is one of these stakeholders who's willing to actually participate in the process. In most circumstances, the commitment from a diverse group of stakeholders and partners together is the most beneficial. Our society is filled with slogans that praise the benefits of partnerships, but they are a lot of work and they require a lot of time and resources. So why should you pursue them? We'll run through some of these slogans to help explain why. First of all, everyone's heard the expression TEAM stands for Together Each Achieves More, Together Everyone Achieves More. This slogan is applicable in implementation planning when people have water-related needs or problems that they can't solve alone. Partnership is obviously greater than the sum of its parts because you'll come out with a more holistic solution. Also, two heads are better than one. This slogan acknowledges that watersheds are complex and various areas of experience are needed to develop solutions. Some might be skilled in developing the best management practices, but lack the networking contacts to put them on the ground. Others might have local knowledge and perspective on issues, but not know how to work around them. And then some bring marketing or graphic design or outreach ideas that they can add to the mix. Shared responsibility and collective decisions. This relates to how partnerships might provide shielding for individuals or organizations on decisions because they weren't taken in isolation. So there's blame to share if things go wrong, but there's also praise to share when things go right. Pooled resources increase success. This, whether it's financial resources, technical assistance, or outreach, implies that collaboration between multiple organizations and agencies can increase the reach of those resources. Many hands make light work. For anyone involved in any watershed-related event, outreach activities, we know this is true. The more you involve diverse groups and the more people engaged in it, the less burdensome it is for the overall effort, and you're likely to have a bigger, more impactful event. Partnerships also help with trust, support, and relationships. Many organizations and people participate in the planning process because it helps them build relationships with potential clients, or they just enjoy the time and friendships with like-minded people. When you've worked together successfully on a project, it will definitely make the next one easier. And finally, you're likely to have a larger megaphone and platform for outreach. Each group involved will have its own network to reach, and you can deliver your message to people you might not otherwise reach. So again, in general, it's better if you have diversified interests to increase your chance of a broader, more sustained success. We're going to be providing some lists today with considerations that you should make, but we're going to try to break it up with as many real world examples as we can, as we have time for today. But first, we'll start with why partnerships succeed. They have the right representation. It's best to have all interests represented in the watershed. Exclusion or the lack of participation of some group might cause roadblocks later. It's good to state a clear common purpose. People want to know why they're involved. When the overall purpose is not clear or shared, then others might direct the planning toward their own agendas. It helps with collaborative decision making. People are less likely to participate if their ideas or needs or views are not being heard. So reaching decisions by consensus is critical for wide acceptance and success. Fourth, effective, flexible coordination and organization. If meetings are for example, if meetings are too frequent, people might drop out, but if they're too few and scattered or don't have a clear purpose, then people lose interest. So good communication, organization, and flexibility to local desires for success. Two-way communication. All groups subject to power plays, but ensuring that all voices are heard and not just instructed is important. Perceived real inequities can kill partnerships. Give opportunities for members of the group to demonstrate their skills and leadership. This might be with providing ownership in specific projects and letting them take the lead. Also, this might be the most important of all. Participants enjoy relationships and networking. Everyone can think of some group that they've grown about when they have their next meeting schedule, but there are others that are so fun, you really enjoy participating and look forward to it. So make sure your meetings are enjoyable and provide plenty of opportunities for networking. And then finally, it's great to work together and succeed. Make sure you share those successes and provide plenty of stimulating challenges to keep people coming back for more. But partnerships can also fail. So let's look at some of the reasons why that might happen. The worst case scenario is to spend years developing a watershed plan that then turns into a huge paperweight because no one's implementing it. Why do planning and implementation efforts fail? There can be personality conflicts. Unfortunately, some people just don't get along. And once those relationships break down, it can become institutionalized if you don't work past it. Along those lines, there can be differing values. Perhaps one group is pro-development and another is not. If you don't find a middle ground of mutual respect with shared values, then the partnership will not work out. Without commitment. Often partnerships break down at the transition from planning to the implementation. People might be willing to come to a meeting because it gets them out of the office, but they're unwilling to act within the meetings or subsequently. So providing direction on how you expect each partner to contribute from the onset is important. Lack of acknowledgement or credit. Be generous with praise, as recognition is often a major reason why groups participate. Don't forget to acknowledge contributions or you might not receive them again. Unclear roles or expectations. If individuals or organizations don't know why their participation is vital, or they feel like they're being asked to do too much, they may drop out. So let them know what they're signing up for. A fear of association or lack of independence. If a group becomes biased in one direction, or if people feel like they're being tied too closely to positions that they don't feel comfortable advocating for, they may distance themselves, so you need to show respect to all views on issues. Power struggles, inequities, or biases. If one individual or organization dominates the conversation and others aren't afforded the opportunity to share theirs, they can decide that their time might be better spent elsewhere. And then finally, There may just be low community interest or it's controversial. So you need to be aware of potential controversies and make sure that you address those, but also make sure that your planning touches on issues that are of real interest to the local community. So how do we overcome these obstacles to successful partnerships? First, start well. You never know quite what to expect from a community when you start a watershed planning effort. So you should put a lot of work into it before your first meeting. We'll talk about some of the ways to do this on the following slides, but remember saying you don't have a second chance to make a good first impression. Some people might come to the first meeting anticipating threats against their interests or viewing your angle suspiciously. So make sure you provide that safe, open environment with opportunities for people to speak their mind. Keep assessing new invites. Your team should regularly be reaching out. As information emerges and planning progresses, explore new avenues, angles, opportunities, and insights to recruit new participants and keep the group from stagnating. Build momentum. Don't tell everything you know all at the first meeting. Instead, offer small bites of information and highlight projects to sustain interest. This helps the group build confidence, interest, and again, relationships. Get to know each other. Spend time in meetings, but also make sure you have fun social activities for people to get to know each other better. Stay positive. As those of us in the watershed profession know, change takes time. So stay positive and highlight small incremental wins along the way. We've mentioned this, but regularly reward, recognize, and respect appreciation of the contribution of others. And then encourage input from the quieter voices in the group. Make sure that the people that have the most power or knowledge base don't dominate the conversation, and ask questions of some of the quiet, or at least ask for their feedback when you can. So having overviewed some of these basics about pursue partnerships, we'd like to look at the US EPA's 6 steps of stakeholder involvement, from identifying stakeholders to determining their roles and responsibility, defining an organizational structure, identifying skills and resources of the group, encouraging participation and involvement, and then conducting ongoing outreach. We'll address each of these specifically. We'll start with identifying stakeholders. This includes those who can provide technical, financial, regulatory, local, and outreach resources. You might consider categorizing these in terms of influence and interest. There likely is going to be a regular crowd of interested people and professionals who will attend, but you'll want to diligently pursue those who may have the most influence, but have kind of minimal interest. You'll have to think about why their influences matters and how to appeal for their participation. You'll also want to pull in a diverse group of these stakeholders. At first, this might be difficult, but you'll start out with the trusted group of the closest partners and then work outward to receive input from those when you know who to involve and when. You with this step, the Kentucky Water Resources Research Institute has developed a couple of resources. In 2018, we developed the Kentucky Watershed Organization Directory, and this provides a great overview of some of the organizations and agencies throughout the state that relate to watershed work and what they do well, and then where they seek partnerships for assistance. This is a helpful starting place, and if you're using this resource and you want to be added to it, we're updating it with additions or even just like additional new information that may come up. We also have the Water Organizations of Kentucky poster. This was developed as a resource of the organizations that work in the various domains that relate to water. Small maps that show some of the resource issues and the contact areas or regions throughout the state. Both of these are available through our website at the links provided here. And many of the presentations you'll be hearing in the remainder of this module will come from these partners that are included in both of these resources. One of the most critical factors for a successful project, as many of you know, is to find a local champion. This local champion is more than just a stakeholder or partner. It's an individual organization who has a personal vested interest in keeping progress moving. This can be an institution with a long-standing commitment to water quality, or just an individual who has a passion and perseverance to make change. Some of the local champions we've witnessed throughout the state include retired volunteers, farmers, water and water utilities, local municipalities or stormwater utilities, university professors and staff and cooperative extension agents, and nonprofit groups. These local champions have the drive to keep the momentum going over many years to make real change happen. And they can emerge out of the planning process, but you definitely need to keep an eye out for who's going to take that local responsibility to continue with the implementation activities. We wanted to provide some examples, and this is going to be the first local specific example that we are aware of a local champion. There were many champions in the Hanging Fork Watershed already. It's an ongoing project. This watershed is located in Lincoln and Boyle counties, and it's definitely benefited from these people. On the left, you can see the local farming community really benefited from an agricultural watershed coordinator who was also a local farmer, and he really helped sell the agricultural practices and helped put funding from 319 grants and state cost share monies on the ground to put those practices on local farms. And we even had a billboard constructed and installed on one of those farms that recognizes farmers for their efforts to help with things like riparian buffers along the stream banks. Another local citizen worked with the Lincoln County government and the Bluegrass Ad mainly to form a sanitation district. And they obtained significant loan and grant funding for a major sewer line extension that captured over 500 failing septic systems and put them on municipal sewer service. The sanitation district has received multiple awards for that effort. And then finally, my favorite picture at the bottom right is a Houstonville City Council member who helped organize and promote a riparian buffer planting that happened at a local park that borders Hanging Fork Creek, and it serves as an outdoor recreation focal point for the community. Her enthusiasm was invaluable. So, out the stakeholders that you believe are needed, you need to have some idea of what role you would like those partners to play and the responsibilities they'll have. First, you need to decide what you are asking the partner to do. Are they just providing input, or are they helping make decisions? Are they helping you author a grant or report, or just providing labor? There's many ways they can help, but the more clarity you can provide, the better. And the better you know your partner, the better you'll be able to direct your ask. Second, provide some guidance on how decisions will be made. Are decisions limited to a smaller group, but inputs requested from a larger group, or consensus might be required? Do you need a formal board with a quorum? If so, you'll have to decide how you'll vote and how those votes occur. Is the group expected to develop a work product? Is there deliverable, or you just want them to help you implement a practice? You just need to be upfront about it. And again, how much time will be them. Always respect people's time. Everybody is busy. And so you need to let them know what's expected of meeting attendance, how frequently they'll be. Sometimes you're paying for their services and you need to make that clear. And what's the duration of the project? In this approach to directly communicating with potential partners, Start with your most interested and essential partners and then work toward the less engaged and essential. And it will be helpful if you can keep notes on commitments and willingness for future reference. Our example for that slide came from the Chestnut Creek watershed in western Kentucky. During this watershed planning effort, this postcard was mailed to about 1,000 residents to invite them to a public meeting to extend participation and get feedback. Usually these invitations may bring in about 20 or 30 people who want to hear more about what's going on. This one happened to attract closer to 100 people, many of whom had concerns and biases about the purpose and the intent of the meeting. For instance, there were strong opinions that cleaning out the creek would help solve the problem, or there was a lot of talk about flooding, and many saw this as a federal government-led project that should be opposed. So the meeting organizers weren't really prepared to respond to all these concerns. So afterward, they realized that if they had more clearly stated the expectations and what was planned for the meeting, they wouldn't have been confronted by so many unnecessary fears. And so they needed to adapt during the meeting to making sure that they responded to this, and they ended up opening up the meeting to just have more of an open dialogue. Organizational structure was the third item we mentioned. This is often determined by how the funding is administered, if there is funding, and what the drivers are behind the project. For instance, if it's funded by a grant, such as one of the Division of Water's 319 grants, then there may be partners there who are under specific contractual obligations. In this instance, you might have a nonprofit or local government as the lead, with the technical consultants hired to help manage the process or conduct outreach. You may then have a core team with informal committees or work groups that help out. But if the structure is more driven by local community interest in funding, then a more formal voting process might be necessary so the group can mutually commit resources towards an objective. And lastly, structure depends on where the community really desires to participate. If it's a contentious issue, the more formal efforts will likely be needed with lots of space for feedback. If there's not a lot of community interest, then there may be more latitude in how informally the process moves forward. Not one size fits all. As an historical example of this engagement fine-tuning, we wanted to talk a little bit about how Kentucky's watershed management framework for the state has evolved over the years. When it was originally adopted in 1998, the idea was to better manage water quality in the state as an effort led by state and federal agencies who brought in other partners to Watershed Steering Committee. This was an overarching group. And this group was slated to help select and oversee the statewide watershed management efforts. So these groups are noted on the left of your slide. And then moving to the right, priorities were supposed to be established by the 7 major river basin coordinators and their respective basin teams throughout the state. And these people then would guide the local partners to take specific improvement or protection actions. WWKY stands for Watershed Watch in Kentucky, and it was seen as a major local resource for local stakeholders. It was also believed that these local groups would form out of the state's recommendations and guidance. For the most part, this approach proved to be it was actually realized that the reverse approach is often better, where local grassroots level stakeholders express their concerns and interest in water quality, and the basin and state representatives provide the support that's needed to understand and address their issues of concern. Local involvement is critical, but the ways to gain it vary and need to be tailored to the situation. This realization played out in the Floyd's Fork watershed of northern Kentucky when a TMDL, or total maximum daily load, aroused concerns about potential regulation on land uses, especially agriculture and development. The federal EPA and Division of Water understood that they needed an intermediary to help guide the public engagement process to build trust and understand the water issues and the potential ways to address them in a fair way. So, public meetings and real-time feedback tools during those meetings helped with understanding that the stakeholders actually wanted a higher level of engagement in the decision-making process than as opposed to just being informed and possibly just consulted. They were more interested in a higher partnering level. So this latter participation illustrates citizen participation, quality of their public involvement. It shows the degree that the citizens feel they've been involved in matters, from a non-participatory level to a token level to a citizen power level. This is where citizens most often believe that engagement and public participation take place. And this is where the Floyd's Fork stakeholders really wanted to be. And that is why the Water Resources Research Institute helped lead this effort, where they met individually with stakeholders and with focus groups to conduct interviews and get real feedback that was used to help develop the ultimate management recommendation. For example, this one, more of organizational dynamics, is from the Western Kentucky watershed of the Little River near Land Between the Lakes. This one was unique because it was and it is led by community leaders that included elected officials, wastewater utility operators, and large-scale farming interests. These participants are higher-level decision makers that wanted a leading role in the water quality analysis and the resultant decision making, so that they could have because it was expected that the decisions would have direct effects on their business interests. So this led to meetings with more rigid, formalized procedures, including quorums and established voting procedures. Ultimately, they were very successful in bringing in over $800,000 to recruit the USGS to conduct extensive water quality monitoring that included fecal source tracking, so they could help identify the bacteria sources and develop targeted solutions. Another example of organizational structure that's more is the Salt River Conservation Collaborative. This is a diverse group of Kentucky conservation organizations that's working jointly to protect water quality, wildlife habitat, natural areas, and farmland in the northern Kentucky Salt River watershed, while also increasing awareness and support for conservation. Their structure is more of a core development team or a steering board. They have many partners with the shared goals of the collaborative, but they're still approaching it from different angles. And this could make the process a little bit slower, but we believe that the strength and the broad inclusiveness of the group is also ultimately likely to be more successful and resilient over the long term. As we've mentioned, within your partner group, you will want to think about the skills and resources that partners might be able to contribute. The ability to have access to a diverse skill set will really improve your efforts. Here you can see some of the skills or resources that should be evaluated for need and who can fulfill them. By identifying these key resource people, you can make more direct and specific requests for assistance that will be more likely to be accepted and help these individuals feel more engaged. The fifth step in stakeholder involvement is encouraging participation and involvement. This is not necessarily making every meeting. Some might be interested in the doing, but not the planning, or vice versa. Understanding how people are interested in helping and the degree of effort they desire is important. Some may even just want periodic updates, which is okay. And also make sure you're addressing issues of importance to the stakeholders, as I've mentioned. In some cases, this might mean piggybacking your outreach efforts onto tangentially related efforts in the community. Find out what's important to them and make sure you're addressing it in some way. And of course, be sure to capture and affirm different views and perspectives on issues, even when you may disagree with them. And lastly, you'll want to have regular communication. Not too frequent, but not too infrequent. Our example for that, this step is from the upper North Fork of the Kentucky River, which is near Whitesburg, Kentucky, in eastern Kentucky. The local watershed coordinators, who were just finishing up a watershed planning effort, and we were coming out with the recommendations, wisely suggested that outreach include water quality information and assistance that's directly related to the local concerns of drinking water quality and flooding. And obviously, by working to address these concerns in conjunction with general water quality improvement of the local streams, this effort is going to be more likely to attract and retain interest and involvement over the coming years. Finally, the last step in the process is conducting the outreach to inform the community about water quality status and issues, and then gaining buy-in with the desired changes or improvements to the watershed. This will be the focus of Module 6 on effective communications and meeting skills and outreach activities within the community. In summary, effective watershed plans involve working with other agencies, programs, and initiatives to accomplish your water quality goals. The remainder of Module 5's presentations will introduce you to many of the Kentucky partners that you may want to engage with, and we're really excited to hear from them during our upcoming webinars in June and July. Before I hand it over to Steve, we did want to talk a little bit about recruiting and maintaining a volunteer base. Local volunteers are critical for getting input and putting practices on the ground. And the River Network has some really good resources on this topic, which we've used for this presentation. In general, the concepts are very similar to building partnerships. They involve building the relationships in the community, recruitment plans for gaining new volunteers, training of these new volunteers, and developing a database or tracking system for volunteer interests and their participation, as well as their contact information and other details. After reviewing the practices of several different nonprofit organizations that use volunteers, the Urban Institute came to a conclusion. Charities interested in increasing retention of volunteers should invest in recognizing volunteers, providing training and professional development for them, and screening volunteers and matching them to organizational tasks. These practices all center on enriching the volunteer experience. Management practices that focus more on the needs of the organization, such as the documentation of the volunteer hours and such, are actually unrelated to retention of volunteers, even though they help the organization realize other benefits. Also, if you want to attract and maintain volunteers, make sure you recognize them, grow them, and direct them towards suitable tasks. And if you want volunteers, make sure you provide a fun, rewarding environment for them. And this helps with enlisting them to recruit additional volunteers. These statistics provide some idea of who volunteers in the United States. About a third of women volunteer, while only about a quarter of men do. And by Generation X currently has the highest rates of volunteering, but there's a pretty wide distribution among the generations listed. Also, those who do volunteer are more givers. They give about double the rate of non-volunteers. They're 5 times as likely to belong to a group or organization, and they're 3 times as likely to help someone in the neighborhood as opposed to a non-volunteer. So people who volunteer are great resources to have on your team, and sometimes the best way to find them might be to look at related organizations. In Kentucky, what kind of volunteers do we typically see? People in Kentucky volunteer heavily for church activities, sports leagues, and such as coaches, and then youth education activities. Environmental volunteers only appear to account for about 2% of this documented volunteerism category, but we're guessing and hoping that crossover into the large other category as well. When you think about volunteering, you're really talking about people giving their time to something they care about. But rather than give their time, some may choose to give financially. Time and financial givers are on a spectrum of support levels. You'll probably have a larger number of people who might be willing to give a little time or money based on their awareness or interest. But as volunteers take more personal interest and responsibility, they're likely to give more. Think spectrum is important for your organization. How do you move people along from just being aware to feeling personally responsible? In building relationships with volunteers, you need to think through your initial invitation, initial contact with them. Then, how are you incentivizing their desire to give or advance? Do you provide levels of training, other ways to advance up the ladder? And then finally, how do you go about recognizing your donors or your most involved volunteers? All these questions are focused on building relationships over time as interest and commitment grows. In order to recruit additional volunteers, it's important to have a good sense of the drivers behind their interest in contributing, whether that's time or money. You need to start by understanding your audience. There may be some market-based research out there that could help you, or you might need to develop surveys that you can disseminate through your watershed area, and they will show what their motivations are for participation. Based on the research, you can then define the best strategies to reach each target group or audience. For instance, certain social media platforms are obviously better for younger audiences, or recreational groups may have a common meeting place where outreach can be conducted. You might think marinas for boaters or anglers, or feed stores for farmers, or the library for school-aged children. For each strategy, a comprehensive detail of the who, what, where, when, and why should be worked out as an annual plan, complete with a calendar and accompanying budget if possible. And a simple system, such as a spreadsheet or a database, can be used to track when the activities are completed and help understand what approaches are working or not. And then these are evaluated on an annual basis. As an example, we can look at the result of this survey that was used in 2018 to gauge the motivations and outreach strategies for participation in the Citizen Sampling Network, Kentucky River Watershed Watch. You can see that word of mouth and friends were cited as common ways to find out about Watershed Watch, but there were many who selected the other category. Some of these related to newspaper articles, work-related sources, or through participation in similar nonprofit organizations. And The water quality information gained through their sampling participation and the ability to provide it to their communities were the major drivers behind their continuing engagement. For volunteer training, such as with Watch, remember that these training sessions will form a strong impression to the type of effort you are managing. Make sure you use these sessions to concisely reinforce the mission of your organization in a fun and professional way. Having food and refreshments always makes the atmosphere a little more festive and casual. And make sure that the tasks are all clearly described and materials are available. Be sure to include time for interaction and group activities. Volunteering with others is really what makes it worthwhile for a lot of people. And be sure to get feedback before and after to know what you did well and what could be changed. Also, some people will volunteer solely for the professional networking opportunity, so be sure to provide plenty of time for that and don't overload your agenda. Finally, don't forget to inject energy and hope by relaying successes and personal stories. This builds enthusiasm and relationships. Again, we look to that Watershed Watch survey where additional questions inquired about the participants' interest in further levels of participation, like we've talked about. This question asks if samplers would be interested in conducting more intensive sampling to better characterize their watersheds. The majority were interested in stepping up to this level of engagement. Another question asked about willingness to participate in a proposed master sampler program, which would require some additional training, but it would enable their sampling results to be considered by regulatory agencies and scientific researchers. Again, the majority of respondents expressed interest in this option. Finally, it's important to have some sort of way to track engagement, contact information, and time. Often sign-in sheets with participation are necessary for tracking what's called in-kind match for grants, but these forms can also help you keep up with your contacts and reward strong volunteers. Or more formalized central databases may be more helpful in other cases. And always remember, if you use some combination of paper and electronic forms, make sure that the information matches and all goes to the same place so you're maintaining both. Here's some of the helpful resources that we use to develop this presentation. You may want to look further into them for more details on specific topics or just as a good reference. Again, we're also going to have these presentations available for you on our website. So now we make time for a little bit of chat or not, I'm not sure. And then we'll move on to Steve's presentation on local and regional partnerships.
And